And we are the Non-Prophets. Hello to all you wonderful people in YouTube land, from border to border and coast to coast, in distant lands and all the ships at sea. We are the Non-Prophets, and we are so happy to be back with you today on our first show after about 6 months of being someplace else. The Non-Prophets is a product of the ACA, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the separation of church and state and promoting positive atheism. You can support us at patreon.com/thenonprophets. We've been off the airways, but we haven't been out and down. We've been on the Discord these last 6 months, making friends and maybe influencing people. Certainly learning a lot. We've been in the Non-Prophets cave, hard at work in our laboratory. We've been with our beakers and colliders and our centrifuges and whatnot. And we're here to give you a show with a new format, some new guests, and some new segments. We'll be rolling these segments out as time marches on. So stay tuned as we spend our XP on new perks and abilities on the skill tree. Personally, I'm hoping to learn the summon ability and get some interesting guests on the show. And that's where you can help. After you watch the show, please tell us what you like. Please tell us what you don't like. Email us at radio@atheist-community.org. And you try not to be mean, but please try to be nice and constructive. Or if you're going to be mean, at least be funny about it. So I'm here with one new host and one familiar face. The familiar face you know is Jim Barrows, but the new face that you may not have seen on any ACA stuff yet is Puck. Puck, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing great. Yes, this is my ACA debut.
Is it really?
This is, yes.
Oh, well, you couldn't have picked a better show. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where have you been? What have you been doing?
Well, I live in Ohio after having moved here from living in Oregon and Alaska. I grew up and was raised Catholic, moved on to Mormon, and I've been atheist for about 15 years and out for about 5.
Okay, very good, very good. And Jim, how have you been doing?
Oh, not too bad. Doing AXP and a couple other shows and having a good time.
Yes, you are. Well, we're glad to have you on the show. Thank you so much for both of you for being here. Let's see. We're going to cover some interesting topics today. We're going to try to cover everything. We're going to do our best to cover them all, but we'll see what we're going to see. So the first thing we're going to be doing is talking about some voter fraud disinformation campaign that's been going on. We're going to be talking about calls to break up the FBI by Donald Trump Jr. We're going to talk about a looking back segment, one of our new segments. It's not much of a looking back since this person's still with us and very much alive, Rebecca Watson. And then we're going to talk about the Catholic Church and its exorcisms that have been going on lately. And if we have some time, we've got some viewer mail. So let's just get right into this. With that said, the links are going to be in the description. So feel free to pause this video, go ahead and read the links, the same stuff that we looked at. Do some research of your own. If you like, come back and press play, and we're going to be here waiting for you, okay? So the first article we have here is Article 1, Takeaways on Trump, Voter Fraud, and the Election, How a Voter Fraud Discrimination Campaign Became an Election Threat. Now, this is from the New York Times, September 30th, 2020. Before we get into it, I'm going to say this. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We do not endorse any candidates that are running for office. Nevertheless, we are talking about some issues that are happening, things in the news. We're free to do that. So, Jim, do you want to read some of the key segments to give us an understanding of what this article is about?
Yeah, sure. So it's a New York Times Magazine investigation that finds that misleading and false claims about widespread voter fraud are a part of a long disinformation effort that the president has taken to new extremes, is the first paragraph. And they point out that, Trump has been complaining about voter fraud since the November 3rd election, to dispute the November 3rd election should he lose. And this is basically a long-running complaint about Republicans for quite some time about the massive voter fraud that happens every election. And in this case, the goals of the campaign complement the long-running disenfranchisement efforts of Black and Latino voters, and also that he has used more than anybody else, Department of Homeland Security, the Postal Service to prop up claims of fraud as nobody really has done before, and that he started soon after the 2016 election, and he has included Vice President Mike Pence in this. And Pence has supported his claims by pointing out one instance of voter fraud that was caught in his home state. And the problem is that, as the article points out, that law enforcement investigations never find major wrongdoing, and that the politicians who claim it are doing so based on really sloppy data analysis. And they actually they reference another article in here done on September 30th for Trump voter fraud that's based on thousands of pages of court records and interviews with more than 100 key players. But this is basically kind of the thing. He's taking an old strategy to new extremes. Voter fraud has been claimed for a while, and attempts to actually disenfranchise voters have been around since voting in the United States began, starting with slave owners and the South. And he's pulled in the CD, not just the Postal Service and Department of Homeland, but also the CDC, and make claims about the safety of absentee ballots, which, despite the fact that that has the lowest form of voter fraud, and the elections webpage no longer specifically mentions mail-in voting as a safer alternative to in-person votings. That hasn't been terribly well reported. But what is also interesting is just how big a role that Pence has played. And the and citing a voter fraud scheme in his home state of Indiana, but the case involved registration applications that had been flagged by the group that submitted them, and most charges were dropped.
Well, Jim, that's a lot of material right there, and let me just step in here. Thanks for taking us through that article. It's a pretty good one. That one is located at the New York Times. Like I said, link will be in the description, but if I understand correctly, that's behind a paywall. You can sign up to get a certain number of articles per month for free, but if you've exceeded it, then you're going to have to wait till the next month. So, Puck, one of the things you were going to look into is sort of the history of Trump. We covered a little bit of that, but the history of Trump's alleging voter fraud in 2016 and what led up to this. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, this is nothing new, like Jim said. I was able to go back and find some specific incidents that Trump was looking at. There was one in Wisconsin, one in Michigan, one in North Carolina, where there are some things that happen, but they're so minor in scope. Like one of them involved 7 applications, and they weren't even ballots. They were just applications, right? But they're being magnified to make it seem like the problem is bigger than it is. I mean, this is a system that's being run by humans, right? There's going to be mistakes. But what we're not finding, and what nobody is finding, is any evidence of any large-scale manipulation of votes.
Well, except for California recently, right? Where the Republican Party in California was caught putting out fake ballot boxes.
And that's
ballot collection boxes, right?
Yeah, and that's the other weird thing. Like the most of the manipulation is not happening by people who they're accusing. It's usually from inside. It's the people on the right who are causing a lot of these problems.
Right. And I wonder with that, when I saw that in the news, if that was an example of those people trying to show how easy it is to commit voter fraud, and therefore mail-in voting is illegitimate, right? It wasn't to actually remove votes, because probably it's going to be very difficult for the Republicans to prevail in California right now. But this was a really blank, transparent attempt to show how easy it is to set something like this up.
Yeah, and that very well could be. I don't know that the Republican Party whether of California or the RNC itself has actually commented on what the purpose of that was. But it certainly was to disenfranchise voters, because there was nobody standing there going, oh, hey, wait, to say, oh, hey, wait, let me give you your vote back so you can actually go vote, right? They just left these boxes out and we're doing nothing with them. So who knows what they're going to do with the actual votes? Probably nothing. Who knows?
Yeah, possibly.
But if you're really worried about voter fraud, wouldn't you be instructing your U.S. Postal Master to increase the number of investigators, not decrease them as was reported?
I would think so.
And wouldn't it just, doesn't make any sense.
Well, and I looked at some of the measures that have been employed to combat alleged voter fraud, and it really ends up being measures calculated to disenfranchise voters. That's what I've seen. So I know that Trump set up a voter fraud commission, right? And one of the things that some of the things that the voter fraud commission did was, and I have this written down, sent requests to states asking for all voters' names, party IDs, addresses, and even the last four numbers of their social security numbers. The request was so sweeping that more than 40 states objected to it strongly on both sides of the political aisle.
Yeah.
And so now that fraud commission has been decommissioned and is no longer operative. So that was biffed. We've got, I think he's made a mess of the coronavirus, some would say. I think I would say that. And by sowing disinformation and chaos, that's certainly created a situation where people are turning to mail-in voting because they don't want to get exposed or, and affect other people and bring the disease home to people who are a little bit more vulnerable than them. So that's the biggest thing that's, I think, disenfranchised voters. Obviously, he's talked a lot about how mail-in voting is completely unreliable, even though he himself, from what I think, he's famously been a mail-in voter himself.
Well, he was this time in this election because he's a resident of Florida and not New York, and he lives in Washington, D.C., so...
Yeah, exactly. And then I think the one of the other big things that he's done is he's appointed Louis DeJoy as who's I think it's safe to say he's a mega donor. Safe to say that he's a mega donor goon, perhaps. But he's instituting all kinds of measures to what looks like to sabotage the Postal Service's ability to meet the challenge of the increased mail-in voting. Although he claims that that's not the case. And if I may be permitted, there's been delays in delivery caused by removing hundreds of high-volume mail sorting machines across the country, canceling overtime for mail carriers, cutting post office hours. All of that is affecting the speed of mail. He claims this was all routine. Oh, go on.
And suspiciously, most of that is happening in areas that tend Democratic.
Yeah.
So even if, let's say that, let's Steelman what his response, which was he didn't know he was going to do that. Let's say that he had formula and he actually had a purely nonpartisan way to determine which of these things would actually save the post office money.
Mm-hmm.
The effect is you're disenfranchising voters, and you can't do that. So even if he was purely objective in doing this and did this with the idea of what he claims, then you're still effectively disenfranchising voters. Whether you intended to or not is irrelevant.
Now, this whole keeping up with current events thing is actually kind of new to me, but don't I remember hearing a couple years back that there was a substantial scaling down or attempt to scale down of the Postal Service?
Absolutely.
And I wonder if that didn't have anything to do with there's no way they could have known about coronavirus at the time, and the number of people would be relying on mail-in votes that didn't. But I would then think that if we're going to want to be relying on mail-in votes and the accuracy of this, let's kind of help them out a little bit and beef up their funding.
Yeah, Republicans have been trying to cripple the U.S. Postal Service for quite some time.
Right.
And that's not new news. Here you have DeJoy, who is not only a mega donor, but he also is on the board of a competing mail service. He has a direct conflict of interest that he has not absolved himself of, and he needs to. So nothing. I mean, there's all those kinds of problems. But Johnny, you're also talking about the federal government pulling names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers of voters. And it's like, well, why is that a problem? Well, in Florida, we have reporting that the Proud Boys are sending letters to people threatening them if they don't vote for Trump, because they have all of that information. Now, I wonder if they actually have that information. We don't know if they do or not, but if they actually have it, where could they have gotten it from?
Yeah.
What a mystery. Right. What a mystery when you have a pro-Trump governor sitting in Florida, and where could they have gotten that from?
So by Proud Boys, you're of course referring to the same-sex couples that have been taking pictures of themselves and posting it all over Twitter. Those are the Proud Boys, or
actually, I wish those were the Proud Boys we're talking about.
Yeah, I wish
but
so
we're
too.
Actually talking about the gun-toting microdicks. So
yeah, the wannabe brown shirts of the Trump administration.
Well, that's the real problem. And then you talk about, we also know that he has told people to go watch the polls, and again, those are the Proud Boys, QAnon, and the other white supremacist whack jobs that support him that are going to go do that fully armed, because, well, you can't go anywhere without showing off how small your penis is, and that's just problematic.
Let's be clear. We at the NonProphets are not necessarily anti-gun. I have a lot of fun shooting shotguns at the clay pigeon range or going to the range. I've got friends that hunt. I know that some people in the ACA are proud gun owners, but the one thing that separates us, I think, from these type of folks is that we don't feel the need to carry our guns with us all the time because we're not concerned about the size of people's perceptions of our sized penis.
Also, if we do carry them for self-defense, they're pistols, and they are not AR-15s slung on our back for whatever reason you need an AR-15 slung on your back.
For whatever reason there might be. Exactly. It's not even about gun rights. It's about this strange fetishization of it. But we're getting a little bit of a field of it. You're absolutely right.
What was the word for that? Amosexual?
We've been waiting so long to get back on YouTube. You don't know. So that's to be
we have
expected.
so much fun with these conversations. Yeah, but really, and in this case, we're specifically talking about carrying a gun to a polling place and standing outside there and then doing some sort of poll watching. Don't know what you're watching for. You as a civilian have no right to question whether or not someone is actually a citizen or not. You could technically make a citizen's arrest if you see a felony being committed, and voter fraud, I believe, is a felony. But you don't have any right to investigate it. So how do you know it's happening? And given these groups' white supremacist leadings, we can pretty much guarantee that it's going to be people of color who are going to be suffering from the accusations of voter fraud. So,
yeah, what I don't really like about this, and there's lots of things I don't like about this, but just to talk about this, these poll watchers, is it's starting to look like militia groups are stepping into the role of police officers, right?
Right.
And militia groups, I just don't trust that they're going to have the level of transparency and training and sense of justice that I want out of law enforcement officers. And we already see law enforcement officers who have received training and do swear an oath and have a lot of procedural hurdles to become police officers failing in their duties. And now we're seeing militiamen and women, I assume, stepping into these roles. It just seems like it's an alternate universe of law enforcement, and I'm kind of having enough trouble with the universe we're living in, law enforcement.
Right.
I don't need an alternate universe.
Yeah, and we've seen the kind of chaos that mob justice can bring in San Francisco and other places that have been subject to it on a number of occasions. And it's just not what we need. We don't need them stepping into the role of law enforcement. We don't need them supplementing law enforcement without training. There's a whole host of problems with that.
You know,
So yeah, it's hugely problematic.
Puck, let me ask you, what do you think
Yeah.
the end game is with all this? All
You
this
know,
voter
I was actually
voter
about to jump in
suppression
and say this.
yeah, go ahead.
And
Let's have it.
like, I mean, from if you look back at a tweet from July 30th, Donald Trump actually spelled it out. It said it will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. So it makes me wonder, and I genuinely don't know the answer to this. So if you guys do, great. But if the results of the election are seriously questioned, and the reason that they're talking about voter fraud now is just to get it fresh in everybody's mind, so that when the results are put out, then they say, aha, we've known about voter fraud for a long time, now we're seeing the results. I wouldn't have lost by this much had there not been voter fraud. We must challenge the results of the election before we can put a new person into office. So I'm curious about this. What would happen? And the last time I recall something like this would be the hanging Chad debacle, right?
Right.
But what would actually happen if the results were challenged? Do we need to now investigate on specific fraud claims, or do we throw everything out and say, okay, we need a new vote? What happens if the results are not accepted?
Yeah, and I think the only problem with using the hanging Chad debacle as an example, the only problem that I have with that is that that happened between two relatively honest interlocutors.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're politicians.
The good old days.
But they were relatively honest. They both believed in their positions, and they were honestly trying to figure out what the voters wanted. And there was no active, from the beginning, assumption that the other side was cheating.
Right.
I mean, there was a little bit of that, but it didn't start out. And we have started out with this guy since the day after he won the election, he was claiming voter fraud. He's been claiming it ever since. He's just stepped it up in recent months.
I've said this before, and I'll say it again. All this does is delegitimizes the whole idea of democracy. Right?
Yeah, especially ours.
It plays directly into the hands of those who don't even pretend to have a democracy, right? Mm-hmm. Like, no offense to China, they do a lot of good things, but they have a system where the individual voter doesn't have much of a say. The individual citizen doesn't have much of a say in which direction their country goes in, right? Now, there are benefits to that. They can act quickly, decisively, with all the funds necessary to make something happen. However, if you don't toe that party line, you're going to face the music, or you shut up. And places like I've heard Russia called a kleptocracy, right? Yeah, essentially run by a bunch of gangster goons and a wannabe tyrant, Vladimir Putin. The whole idea that Trump is a Putin stooge, unwittingly perhaps, but a Putin stooge, because the actions that he takes would seem to make Putin look less bad by comparison, right? It's that well, America does a lot of bad stuff too. We're not exactly the good guys kind of thing. There's no aspirational aspect to the way he talks about this country, the way we can improve things. It's let's get back to the old way of doing things. Let's be vague about that, of course, because the old way of doing things was pretty slimy. Yeah. And then we talk about the whole idea of, draining the swamp. If anything, it seems like this administration is importing other swamp creatures into the swamp. The creature from the Black Lagoon's sleazy cousins have moved into positions of power. That's what it looks like to me.
Speaking of that, I think our next article that's a good segue into the next article.
Sure.
That was smooth. I like that.
I like that. Mm-hmm. Hey, let's talk about that. Let me see here. Let me just do a little bit of scrolling around here. Puck, could you read us a little bit about that? Our second article is Donald Trump Jr. says Dad's next move is to break up the FBI. He has got to get rid of these things. And this is coming from rawstory.com, but it's covered all over the news. And if you go to the link that we're going to have in the description, it's going to have the video of him talking to a Fox News pundit on that subject. Puck, can you give us some key segments?
Yeah. During an interview on Fox News, host Maria Bartiromo, I'm going to butcher that one, asked the president's son what his father would do if the FBI does not do his bidding by smearing the son of Democratic nominee Joe Biden and by preventing Democrats from increasing the use of mail-in ballots. We have to keep fighting, Trump replied. We're fighting with one leg and two arms tied behind our back. You know, we don't have the mainstream media that's willing to, at this point, not even just boost the other side, but literally run for cover for what would arguably be the biggest corruption scheme in American political history. This is the stuff that makes Watergate look like kindergarten. This isn't hyperbole. I'm reading the direct quotes here.
Yeah, right.
Says here, they refuse to acknowledge their own corruption, he explained. And the reality is, I think, when Donald Trump wins, he has to break up the highest level of the FBI. He has to get rid of these things. And more importantly, maybe break up the swamp in general. You know, why is the Department of the Interior headed out of Washington? Why don't we spread all of these things up throughout America?
Right. And let me just stop you right there, because
Yeah.
the article actually is very short. But it's just the concepts that are being bounced around right here sort of boggle my mind. I know we're talking about Trump being held responsible for his corruption, and yet there's a perception that others, who shall remain unnamed until a few seconds from now, are not being held responsible for theirs. And specifically, I think they're talking about the Hunter Biden scandal that's going on right now. That's mostly being covered by the New York Post. Puck, did you get a chance to take a look at what is the nature of that scandal that he's saying is not being investigated? The FBI is not picking up.
I looked at this, and hopefully somebody's going to be able to fill in the gaps, because
Sure.
as far as I've been able to see, someone needed a laptop repair, so they dropped off their laptop in a shop. Somebody poked around in the files that were there and found some emails that were somewhat incriminating. This is where the FBI would come in, because they're the ones you'd go to investigate these claims. And apparently it shows some interesting connections between Hunter and Ukraine and Hunter and China. Whoa. And it doesn't seem like the emails themselves, they might be a little eyebrow raising, but there's nothing on here that I could see anyway that immediately says, hey, guys, look out, there's some major conspiracy here. Unless I'm missing something. So if I did miss something, please let me know.
I think it's interesting that, from my understanding, is that Hunter Biden resides in California, and the laptop shop the computer shop he took it to was in Virginia. I'm not entirely sure why he would fly cross country when he's already in California. And I think California probably has one or two good computer people there.
I've actually got my computer fixed in California once. I can attest to, well, it was a little expensive, so maybe he wanted to save some money by flying to Virginia.
Fly to Virginia and drop it off of Virginia. And then they give these things to the New York Post, which doesn't exactly have the best reputation for vetting things that Trump likes. So I think there's a couple of problems with that.
There are.
And that is, the problem in general. Trump makes very unspecific claims. I was watching a video of him saying, go get Biden's laptop, referring to, I think, the candidate, and read his laptop. And it's like, well, how are we supposed to get a hold of his laptop and be more specific? He never makes specific claims about specific charges other than those that have already been disproven in courts of law and the public opinion and by facts.
One of the things that I saw here when I did a little bit of research on this was, so after months of investigation, 2 Republican-led Senate committees unveiled a report in September that found no evidence of wrongdoing or corrupt actions by Biden in connection with his son Hunter's business dealings in Ukraine. Okay. Many news sources, and this has been all over the news, many news sources wouldn't touch the article or the reporting with a 10-foot pole.
Right.
Including the New York Post reporter who actually was involved in it, had credibility doubts as to the authenticity of the story. And he refused to put his name on the story, yet it still went out. Right.
Right. There's problems.
At some point, the FBI was asked what they thought about it. They declined to comment. All right. But then now the laptop is in the FBI's hands. All right. The Bureau said it will be in touch with the DNI, should actionable intelligence arise related to the claims. So we're going to see what's going to happen there. Again, this is Trump's FBI. It shouldn't be anyone's FBI, but it's
Right.
Trump's FBI.
Well, that's what Trump Jr. was, Don, or was it Don or the other son?
Don
It's Don,
Jr.
yeah, not Eric.
Don, yeah, that's what Don was saying. That Trump needs to. When we're being a little explosive when we say break up the FBI, because that's not actually what Don says. He says that what they need to do is to break up the top levels of the FBI.
Right.
And yeah, so what happens when the FBI becomes just the investigation arm against anybody that Trump doesn't like, which is something that he tends to want to do, right?
Well, look at the DOJ. Look at the DOJ.
He wants people who will do whatever he says, regardless of whether or not it's legal. And he has fired people who have brought up legality issues with what he's wanted to do.
Well, let me say this, if I could. This is the problem with, and everyone wants to have an executive that knows how to get stuff done, right? But we have here an example of a very extreme executive who is not used to being challenged, right? There's so many times we've heard in decades past, well, the government's like a business. It should be run like a business because the businesses are efficient, right? I ran a peanut farm, or I run a pizza company. It's just running a company it's not. You don't have a product.
No. Right. You're not the purpose of the government is not to generate profit like a business is. So it has other things that it needs to take into priority.
Right. Well, very true. But also you want businesses that are run legally. And so if Trump is having issues as president with issues of legality, then, that kind of raises other questions about his other business dealings and if he's never been challenged before. But how does somebody who gets stuff done not handle challenges, especially legitimate challenges to what he wants to get done? There are legitimate hurdles to anything you want to do. And responding to those hurdles by firing the people who bring them up and going forward anyway is how you end up, bankrupting a casino twice.
Right. Well said. Well said.
So it's usually like when it comes to things like this, I love it when you guys do this because you'll talk about the details of the actual article. My mind goes in completely different place. Right. My mind goes to there is a segment of the population who, if you no amount of proof is going to convince them that this is there's nothing to this, right? And all they need is a person in authority who keeps on saying something like, yeah, but what about the laptop? And that's all the verification they need. So what do you do about a substantial segment of the population who isn't going to care about the facts, who's going to get hung up on, I guess 4 years ago it was emails and now it's laptop. They don't care about whether or not there's anything to it. They just want to hear someone in authority who says, hey, there's something to this. And then the fact that no other major news media is going to cover this just adds fuel to the fire. It's like, oh, okay, well, we must be onto something if everybody's not going to touch this. Right.
Right. It's the deep state. It's the left-wing media. It's all these people who are just afraid of losing their cash cow. Right.
Right.
And I'll say this too. I mean, the idea that you can throw fake news, which I think is amazing, that the term fake news was coined by the fella who puts most of it out there. But the idea that you can throw fake news out there and it takes so much time to debunk. It's the Gish Gallop. We run into this on the call-in shows. Jim, you've seen Gish Gallops on AXP, right?
Oh yeah.
We're living in a Gish Gallop world.
Well, this is nothing new. Doesn't have anything to do. I mean, you can go back to the Nazi Party, and they knew they were lying when they made accusations. It was harder then to prove, but you had the people opposing the Nazi Party simply trying to go at it with logic and evidence, and that didn't work then because you had the same type of people. And honestly, I don't know what you can do about that. I think part of that is education. We need to stop letting private schools and homeschooling happen, period, end of conversation. Everybody goes to the same school, regardless of how much money you make or don't make. and everybody gets the same education. We focus on pouring money into education and getting people educated in critical thinking. But you're still going to have a percentage of the population that isn't going to, no matter how much you teach them. So I don't know what you do about those, except try to make them a minority and make the majority critical thinkers.
Yeah, that's something that we've talked about on the Discord a bunch of times. And it's been in our minds a lot too, is you get people who from an early age are told to, trust your elders, trust the people in charge. But what you really should be doing, although it creates much greater burdens for a parent and for teachers and for authority figures, is teach critical thinking, teach questioning authorities, teach sifting through sources. Make that be the thing that you teach primarily over multiplication tables, although that's important too. If people don't know how to question, then they just fall for everything. And but just to talk about how do we fix this? I know you've heard of deep fakes. Both of you have heard about deep fakes, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Think
about this. I saw something in the news about this is sort of related, so we're getting a little bit far afield. But I think it was Photoshop has released a program or a sub-program, some sort of DLC or whatever you want to call it, that can help you identify whether an image has been altered using Photoshop. And that's great. But here's the thing. Okay, so let's say some unscrupulous type decides to release a video of someone using altered language and a voice impersonator or a synthesized speech of a rival candidate saying something horrible, right? And that gets out into the news. And it takes a good couple of days or a couple of hours to counteract that fake news article, right? Well, now millions of people have already seen it, and they don't have that instinct or that cultivated behavior pattern of waiting to see whether or not it's authenticated before they just believe it, right? And now we're going to be in the place where everyone is lying past each other constantly, and nobody knows what to believe. And now you can't trust the news, you can't trust the information, just trust the things you can trust. And we devolve back into this state of you can't know anything and everything is equal, right? Putin's just as good as Trump, just as good as Biden, right? That's where I see it going, unless we can create a cultural change of learning to view things with skepticism. Am I crazy?
No, and that actually it's really interesting that we bring those up, because I'm looking at these two articles that we're talking about. They do have a common thread, and that is that if you don't like the results, question the system. Right now, this we like to think that in the voting system, which is very robust and very well maintained, that the results are going to be accurate. Well, now you have someone saying these are the results you should have, and if those aren't the results you get, there's a problem. And in this very article, it's Don Jr. is saying, we know what the results should be, and if we don't get those results, then there's something wrong with the system. It's not there's a problem with it's like if they do an investigation, they say, well, we can't find anything here. It's not that there's nothing to find. It's that the system itself is wrong because it doesn't give us the results we want.
Right. And
that's messed up.
Yeah. It also comes down to people thinking that everyone thinks like they do. Because why wouldn't they? I think like this, so why wouldn't everybody? So how can I be in the minority, and how can you get somebody to vote against me that doesn't agree with me? And that is just not the case. A lot of people think a lot of different things. And so people are going to disagree with you. But yeah.
Well, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask a question. Break up the FBI. I think you were fair. It wasn't actually break up the FBI, although he did say something about have the states take more of a responsibility and have it be dispersed.
What he was talking about was taking a lot of the agencies that are currently based in Washington, D.C. and move them out into the rest of the country. Like the Department of Interior, why is it in D.C.? It could be in Washington State, for instance. And he is right. However, the people who have the most power have proximity to the source of power. So in the United States, if you want power, across the entire country. You move to Washington, D.C., and you get as close to Congress and the president as you possibly can, because access is power in and of itself. And so what he's really talking about when he does this, and whether he knows this or not, I don't know. I don't like to credit him with a heck of a lot of intelligence, but he may have some.
I don't think he's unintelligent. I just think he's a toady for his dad.
Yeah, and in this case, what he's talking about is taking things that don't have a lot of power, like the Department of Interior, Department of Education, maybe the Department of Agriculture, and probably leaving Department of Homeland Security and the FBI and the Secret Service and the DEA and the law enforcement, and maybe Department of Education, depending on how you wanted to do it, leaving those people that could directly support the furthering of his father's and his political ambitions close to the source of power, while getting everybody else away from that source of power. And that is also problematic as well, because the Department of Interior has things it needs to do, and so it needs to have access to the people who can help them do that, which is the politicians. So yeah, that's also problematic. And if you get rid of the top levels of the FBI, you're setting yourself up for a police state.
And that's where I was going with that. Is there are examples in other countries where usually it's the press first, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you discredit the legitimacy of the free press. I wonder if that's happened in this country.
We don't have press conferences anymore. We don't have the that we used to have on a daily basis. And honestly, I can't blame him for that, because all of his press secretaries turn those things into circuses, whether they intend to or not, because they say some of the dumbest things. I think that is, definitely a strategy.
Well, we see that. So we see, exactly. We see delegitimizing the press. So now you can't trust the information that's coming out that you don't agree with. And then in other countries that have had dictatorships, right? Germany, Spain, Argentina is one of them, where now you are challenging the authority of the courts to make certain decisions. We've already seen a bit of that too, where I won't get a fair shake because this judge is Mexican American, or I'm going to break apart this circuit of the Ninth Circuit and turn it into two different circuits because I don't like how much power is happening over there. Mm-hmm. It's the willingness. What really concerns me is something we touched on, is the willingness to bend the system that is supposed to deliver justice so that it delivers a certain result, rather than maybe listening to the constituents, looking for what's actually just, what's actually fair, and whether you actually can do something. Like, no, let's just change this so we can. There's been talk about stacking the Supreme Court, right? You can do that, but that's, I think, a step in the wrong direction, because then all the lefty liberal progressives are fine with Biden stacking the court right now. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. But wait until Baron Trump decides that he wants to stack the court. They're going to change their tune. No offense to Baron, he's a kid. But let's say Ivanka, not a kid, right? Yeah. President Ivanka Trump. It's I mean, there are systemic changes that need to take place, but I just don't think that this is one we should be flirting with.
No, definitely not. And that leads to tit-to-tat, and what do we do when we have 100 judges on the Supreme Court?
And we saw examples of that with weakening of the I just blanked. The filibuster rules, right? Mm-hmm. Weakening the filibuster rules to benefit the party that could do so, and then it flipped, and now it's the other way around. Or executive orders. People were so happy about Obama with his executive orders, and now they're upset about it because of Trump. And it's going to happen again and again, over and over again. I think that respect for the structure of the government, to the extent that it is capable of producing justice, and then making improvements to protect individuals' rights, right? Mm-hmm. To weed out racism and systemic problems that way, but not just upending it so you can get a short-term political goal achieved. Jim, do you know anything about do you have any examples from your large bank of knowledge about other countries actually, getting rid of their national investigative branch?
No, I mean, usually they don't get rid of it. They beef it up and they turn it into their own personal hit squad. And that's really kind of the problem with removing. So one, if you remove the top levels of the FBI, one, you're removing a lot of institutional knowledge on policies and procedures. Despite the fact that all policies should be written down, a lot of them are transmitted word of mouth. You don't have people, you don't have FBI agents pulling out the policy book to see what they can do. They're asking a supervisor or something like that to get that information. So you're losing a lot of institutional knowledge. But you're going to replace all of those people with not people whose interest is justice and law and order and integrity. You're replacing them with people whose primary qualification is that they're pro-Trump. And that is not, and we have seen that, right? His Department of Education pick, her only qualification is that she's pro-Trump. His current Supreme Court pick can't explain freedom of speech.
Or won't.
Right, or won't. I say can't because she basically, she didn't even really dodge the question, in my opinion. But her biggest qualification, not that she's been sitting on a court for 10, 15, 20 years. She's only been on it 3 years. Her biggest qualification, she's a Trump supporter. That is not what we should be looking for in a qualification for any position. We should look at the roles and duties of the position and then find the person who can best execute those responsibilities and duties and roles. That's all we should be looking for.
Hopefully the deep state will prevent the FBI from breaking up and being replaced by more toadies.
Well,
I'm kidding, of course.
Yeah. I don't think he can do it before the election. And even if he does, he can just reverse the policy. It's post-election, if Trump wins, that we will probably see some of these sweeping changes of throwing good people out simply because they won't sign a statement of loyalty to the president instead of their oath of loyalty to the Constitution.
Right. And sign a non-disclosure agreement as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All of which he has done.
Well, we're going to be monitoring this as it develops. Of course, the election is just around the corner, so things may change radically in any direction at this point. So we'll see where we go. But this is time for our this is one of our new segments we're going to be doing. It's called Looking Back.
Looking Back.
All right, so the Looking Back segment looks to a website called the Free Thought Almanac, all right? And that's put out by someone called Ronald Bruce Meyer, who I'm actually going to feature on the show when we come around to his birthday. It's coming up pretty soon. But what the Free Thought Almanac does is it looks back in history to people and events and sort of gives you like maybe a secular or a skeptical or a humanist view of history. And you can kind of see what happened this date in history. Our first topic we did today, and it's really just because I've been following Rebecca Watson for quite some time, is Rebecca Watson. Now, who is she and why is she on the Almanac? Now, I can cover this one. We're not looking back very far. She was born October 18th, 1980. She's a blogger, YouTuber, activist. I found her through the almighty algorithm on YouTube and talking about why she was coming back after an absence. And the absence was actually because of hostility toward her and the work product that she puts out because of some of her more vocal anti-MRA and anti-feminist, anti-feminist. So she founded a website called Skepchick in 2005. It's an organization dedicated to promoting skepticism and critical thinking among women around the world. They put out a monthly online magazine called Skepchick Magazine, which was launched in 2006. Not sure if that's still around. Skepchick.org is the main website. Skepchick was the 2012 winner of the Occam Awards for Best Skeptic Blog. In May 2007, she entered a public radio talent quest, a contest aimed to find new public radio hosts. The contest reported receiving more than 1,400 entries. Watson's entries won the popular vote in every round. She was declared one of 3 winners who each would receive $10,000 to promote a public radio pilot, although that program was not actually picked up. Like I said, I know her mostly from YouTube. So some of the topics that she covers, I just pulled it right from the list of videos. We've got study suggests right-wing authoritarians aren't funny. Why late-term abortion should be legal, accessible, and safe. Jordan Peterson, addiction and the cult of personal responsibility. Anti-feminism and videos and her reactions to the MRAs like Thunderfoot and individuals like that who seem to be hyper-focused in large part on more feminist material. So I think it's a great overlap with a lot of my interests, the stuff that she puts out. I don't necessarily always see the way she sees it, but it's certainly a perspective that I think is valuable. And I go to her YouTube channel for some, different content to learn about what's out there. Puck, what did you find on her and some of the things that were going on in her past?
Okay, so I'm new to the atheist community and new to the concept of atheist communities as a whole.
Right.
And you don't get very far researching into Rachel Watson before you find out about Elevator Gate and the incident that happened in Dublin. And the weird thing, like when you look at a situation like this, in my opinion, it's something that like the incident itself was small and handled. And like if you look at the original time when she talked about it on YouTube, it was not accusatory at all. There was no names being named. It was not like allegations of rape or anything. It was just a very spot. And I even have a quote here. It just says it says at 4 a.m, we were at a hotel bar, 4 a.m. I was also going to bed, walked to the elevator, and a man got on the elevator with me and said, "Don't take this the wrong way, but I find you very interesting and I would like to talk more. Would you like to come to my hotel room?" And this is her words now. Just a word to the wise here, guys. Don't do that. I don't really know how else to explain this, that this makes me incredibly uncomfortable, but I'll just sort of lay it out that I was a single woman in a foreign country at 4 a.m. in a hotel elevator with you, just you and I. Don't invite me back to your hotel room right after I finish talking about how it creeps me out and how it makes me uncomfortable when men sexualize me in that manner. That's it. Like that was all of her initial statement, right? And it could have just been dropped right there, but no. Yeah. Now, like I said, you know what? I'm new to the atheist community, so I was unaware that to use the word kerfuffles like this happened and caused major specific schisms within the groups. And this one was huge.
Still does.
And yeah, I mean, this is relatively, old news for the specific incident, but same old for most of the atheist community, which is still dominated by men because sometimes men act like assholes. And, sometimes just to steel the man side of this, I don't think sometimes people that as men, we realize what's really kind of going on. And I'll give you an example. I went up to go see the Matt and Aaron and Seth up in Oklahoma City, or up in Oklahoma, and I'd only been on the Atheist Experience twice. I think at that time, once or twice, not very often. But I had signed up to go long before I was a host, and so I was there to see those 3 people as a fan. And of course, it didn't turn out that way. And so, I'm 5'11", I'm 400 pounds. I played in the SCA for years where I put on armor and hit people with sticks. I'm not easily intimidated. And yet I found myself intimidated on a number of occasions when 6 guys, overly enthusiastic, basically had me cornered. And yeah, I started wishing I had armor on. So if a group of guys can do that to somebody like me, imagine what happens when you're doing it to someone who has not stood among 1,000 people hitting each other with sticks with full armor on a regular basis and enjoyed it. Imagine doing that to someone who is not 400 pounds, but 90 pounds sopping wet. Male or female doesn't really matter, but imagine doing that to somebody else, and there are 8 or 9 or 10 of you surrounding this person, and there is no way out. That is intimidating. It doesn't matter who you are. And in this case, in the elevator, you're one guy in an elevator. That's really problematic. So just steel manning this situation, be aware of your surroundings and have some empathy.
I talk about situational awareness. And sometimes people really lack it. And I think the idea of male privilege has been bounced around a lot lately. I would say that is one aspect of looking at it, but I really think it's men typically have had this luxury of not having to have situational awareness and getting away with it. And this guy wasn't thinking about it. Who knows? Maybe they had been at the cocktail party afterwards, and Watson was back to the hotel room, whatever it might be. It doesn't matter. You have to be aware of the people that you're talking to. You have to be aware of where they're coming from, who you are. You are not the hero of everyone's story. Okay. Right. You are just another person. They don't know who you are. So, I tie this together with this idea that this probably happened. This happened at some sort of skeptics convention, right?
Yes.
But think about this. There's a lot of I've talked with other people in the community about this. The legacy, and I saw something on this. The legacy of religion, the legacy of dogma, sticking around longer than the dogma itself sticks around. And this idea that men take charge, the idea that men go out there and they do this thing, or that women are more receptive, or these ideas with regards to trans identity or non-binary identity, people gravitate toward the things that already confirm their beliefs, the things that they're comfortable with. I do it, you do it, but the trick is to challenge your own beliefs, to challenge your comfort zones, to find out more. We hear about this. I've had this conversation so many times. But the science says this. Really? Does it? The science you found, the science that you specifically cited to, supports your position. But what if you look over here? Oh, it doesn't say that. You didn't mention that.
Or
right?
Read the next paragraph.
Read the next paragraph. Turn the page.
Read the conclusion.
But Rebecca Watson is not limited to elevator gate, although that was a decisive moment. I think indicative of what has been called like YouTube atheists' response to Watson, the Thunderfoots of the world, who should really just stick to the science debunking, stick to, does the moon give off a cold light? Stick to the healing candles. Stick to or stop shooting your mouth off and do some research. But Watson stands for a heck of a lot more than just having to face these loudmouth MRA types. I'd like to read a quote here from Watson that I think is really good. It's something for us to keep in mind, because it's something that we as non-believers, as skeptics, as humanists have to keep in mind to give us meaning in life. And something that might ring true for the audience. It does for me. And this is quote, "Once I got rid of the idea that maybe I should be here serving a God, once that was gone, I think that I allowed myself to feel more meaning in what we have here. I think that that's what is particularly beautiful about living a life free of God. It's that I have the ability to look around and know that this is all I get, that I have to find joy in my family and in my friends. I think that there's some strength to that. It makes life sweeter. It makes life more worth living to me. When you ask about meaning, I think that the important revelations that we only get this one life, and we have to help other people enjoy their time on earth here too. I think that one of the tenets of humanism is that the important thing is helping out your fellow man and making the world a better place, a heaven on earth, so to speak. What do you two think about that?
Completely agree.
Yeah.
I talk about empathy and using empathy to guide you more than love. Have some empathy for your person you're talking to, your interlocutor. We use that term normally in a philosophical tone or setting, but it also works whether if you're meeting somebody for the first time at an event. Have some empathy for what they're feeling and for what they're going through at that moment. Just because it's a single member of the appropriate sex does not mean they're there to be picked up. They're there for the same reason you are, which is not necessarily to be picked up. And not necessarily, they're there to meet people and to have fun, but not really anything else. And let's try and remember that. Remember where you are. If you want to go meet people, go to a singles bar or a singles club or a singles event. Don't go to a skeptics event.
Yeah, go to a website, go to an app, go to Tinder or Grindr or Manhunt or something like that.
No, and I just
Or
love
all
how
of them.
I just love how a big part of this is taking charge of your own life, and instead of trying to figure out what God wants for you, you decide what's important to you. You decide friends and family and this life, because we're not guaranteed a next one. There might be, who knows, but we know we have this one, and we know we're sharing this space with each other, and we should make it the best time that we possibly can. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and I think if you approach life that way, if you approach your interactions with people like that you're going to avoid the toxic behavior patterns that we see. If you're always directed outward and you're always trying to take down everyone else, right, instead of building other people up, then you're going to create a hostile environment where no one's ever safe. But if you try to come to an understanding, try to come to like working together, because whether we like it or not, we have to live together on this planet, right? And I'm not going to let you kill me if you don't like me. I'm going to do my best to stay alive. So, no, I really, I do appreciate that sentiment. And of course, we at the ACA we try to promote positive atheism, a humanistic view toward the world, getting along together. Although some of the call-in shows look like it's us versus them. It's really like, let's come to an understanding. Let's figure this out together, please.
Those are the best calls.
Those are the best calls. So with that said, we're going to move on to our next article. Try to bring it up a little lighter. This is out of the AP News. Archbishop performs an exorcism to cleanse a protest site. And Puck, I wondered if you could walk us through the key segments. Just give us an understanding what the article is all about here.
This one's an interesting one, and it has a fun side and it has kind of a dark side. So let's see what we got here. From the Associated Press, Archbishop of San Francisco performed a short exorcism ceremony Saturday outside a Catholic church where protesters had earlier toppled a statue of Father Saint Junipero Serra, saying that the ceremony was intended to drive out evil and defend the image of Serra. Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone performed the ritual before some 150 supporters before holding a special mass inside St. Raphael Catholic Church, and as expected, marched to Planned Parenthood clinic, the San Francisco Chronicle reports.
Okay, now this seems to fall into that category of this is a person we don't like. This is a Confederate hero, right? This is a person who owns slaves. This is a person who's been violent and nasty in the past. Let's tear down the statue. Now, we've had conversations about this on the Discord, but let me tell you a little bit about this person who the church has chosen to commemorate in the form of a statue. Okay, so Father Junipero Serra was born in 1713. He died in 1784 on the island of Majorca, Spain. I have a friend that lives there. Hola, Jorgito. He was a priest in the Franciscan order of the Catholic Church. Junipero Serra was a driving force in the Spanish conquest and colonization of what is now the state of California. He was a brilliant person. Doesn't mean if you're brilliant doesn't mean you're good. He was a professor at Lulian University, but he left for missionary work in Mexico City. For 15 years, he helped administrate Mexico City's College of San Fernando at about 1749. But in 1773, he convinced the authorities of Mexico City to increase financial and military support for the expansion of his missions and to expand the authority of the Franciscans over the army and the baptized mission Indians. He also urged Mexican officials to establish an overland route to Alta California, a suggestion which led to colonizing expeditions from New Mexico, which established civilian settlements in San Francisco in 1776 and in LA at 1781. Now, this wasn't just missions for the purpose of spreading the good word of the Lord Jesus Christ. There was a lot of political power associated with this that served economic and political purposes. So the number of civilian colonists in Alta California never exceeded 3,200, and the missions with their critical Indian populations were critical to keeping Spain within the political orbit. Okay, economically, the missions produced all the colony's cattle and grain, and they were trading back and forth with Mexico for luxury goods. Now, here's where it gets super nasty. So it was a destructive colonization process. The Spanish, largely through disease, were responsible for a population decline for about 300,000 Indians in 1769 to about 200,000 by 1821. Now, disease... sometimes you can't control the disease that gets spread, but don't worry. Serra had other plans too. He had a strenuous work regime and high population density within the missions that caused high death rates among the mission Indians. By law, all baptized Indians subjected themselves completely to the authority of the Franciscans. And let me pause there for a second. The Franciscans. Remember everyone's favorite saint? St. Francis of Assisi, brother, sun, sister, moon, okay? The Franciscans were pretty much owned these people. They could be whipped, shackled, imprisoned for disobedience, and hunted down if they fled the mission grounds. Indian recruits who were often forced to convert nearly at gunpoint could be expected to survive mission life for only about 10 years. As one friar noted, remember, a friar of the Franciscans, friends, the Indians, quote, live well free, but as soon as we reduce them to a Christian and community life, they fatten, sicken, and die. Junipero Serra is still a well-known figure in California, a virtual icon of the colonial era. In 1987, Pope John Paul II beatified Serra, and many Indians and academics condemned this decision, pointing to the harsh conditions of mission life and Serra's own justification for the beatings. In 1780, and this will be the end of it, okay? This guy's a scumbag. But in 1780, Serra wrote that spiritual fathers should punish their sons, the Indians, with blows appears to be as old as the conquest of the Americas. So general, in fact, that the saints do not seem to be any exception to the rule. The defenders say that this was just a matter of the times, and we need to understand him in the times that he lived in. So now that you know that, are you going to shed any tears about the statue coming down? What do you folks think?
No, not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit.
You probably watched me like squirming in my seat as you're reading this article, and that's it. I'd like to reveal something here. I'm actually Filipino, so now the audience can stop guessing. And if you look at Southeast Asia and the surrounding islands down there, you're going to see a lot of Buddhist countries, a lot of Hindu-believing countries, except for the Philippines. And that is because the Philippines was colonized by Spain, hence the name the Philippines from King Philip, right? And when you throw in your country in there, you're not just doing that, you're also spreading your religion. And I'm not going to use this as a platform to start teaching about Filipino history, but let's just say that they didn't spread it in the kindest way possible. Okay, so as you're reading that, I'm thinking back about my history, right, and the history of the Philippines and why it's called the Philippines and why the Philippines has a name that its own language cannot write. If you want to think about it that way, the Philippine language cannot actually spell the Philippines. It's
Wow.
that messed up in there. And they go in there and they spread their belief. I assume they must have tried it kindly at first, and then when that didn't work, let's bring out the muskets.
Yeah.
And
no,
depending on
they
who you
probably
ask
didn't
now,
even try that. They probably tried the muskets first.
Yeah,
probably.
that's what I'm gonna.
It's a
yeah.
Spanish hunky. It's a Spain.
but now, several hundred years separated from that, you actually have people in the Philippines who are grateful that this happened. People who are very much a part of the Catholic community there, who are like, you know what, it's a good thing that we were colonized by Spain instead of having to deal with the same superstitions and beliefs that the other islands and the other countries here have. We're the refined ones. They actually think that, and I know that because I'm related to a few of them. So
brainwashing works well when you do it at the point of a gun.
it does, and now we have the education, we can look back at this and say, "Wow, you know what? This was a really bad thing to do." And I put this statue at the same place that you would put those Confederate statues. This shouldn't be up. We shouldn't be celebrating this anymore, guys. We know better now. Yeah. Let's have our landscape reflect that.
Yeah,
so sorry for the rant, but
no, not at all. Not at all.
Once we got once we got on international colonization, I was like, okay, this is my time to speak up.
We'll have plenty of opportunities to talk about international colonization on the show, but let's not make it only that, because we want people to tune back in to feel good once in a while.
Right.
Well, and then that's Franciscans. Go ahead.
And that's the next part of this is exorcism, which is
well, let me deal with the Franciscans real quick. Yeah, before we get to the modern stuff. So the Franciscans have done a really good job of rehabilitating their image. However, they were the folks that in 1236 Pope Gregory IX appointed, along with the Dominicans, as inquisitors for, nobody expects, the Spanish Inquisition. And for the Inquisition. Here we have the San Franciscans who take a vow of poverty. St. Francis of Assisi is often seen with birds and small animals, and he's kind of that patron saint. But this order was fairly bloodthirsty at one time. They were not, the Jesuits are generally considered militant, and the Franciscans don't have that reputation, and yet they were. And so this really isn't a surprise to me that this was a Franciscan. One, it was Spain, and the Franciscans are fairly popular there. But two, these guys just were not good people.
Can I jump in here, because we're running toward the end of the show. I want to touch one briefly about what the church is doing here. Okay, they sent an exorcist to cleanse the area.
Did they, or did the Pope just, or the bishop just decided to do it? Right?
Yeah.
Well, the church did, right? So
the Archbishop performed a ritual. My understanding is that there are actual priests trained in the ritual that do that. That wasn't him.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
So the Archbishop performs an exorcism. So are you saying that because he wasn't a trained exorcist, that it was symbolic and not effective, Jim?
I'm not entirely sure how the church goes about figuring out an exorcism. I know they typically don't do it lightly.
That's right.
That there's usually an investigation going on to see if there are demonic influences going on. So they'll do things like, if they suspect somebody being possessed, they will first take them to a psychiatrist, and only when all other options have been exhausted do they conclude, oh, it must be, right? I don't know, therefore Satan in this case.
Well, but just as a symbol, okay?
Yeah.
All right? Demonic forces possessed the people to tear down a statue of a person who brutalized thousands of people and ended their lives early for the purpose of expanding Franciscan hegemony over what is now fairly ancient California.
Well, it's not ancient by any standards but U.S., because it's only a couple hundred years in the past. But God works in mysterious ways, and his ways are not to be questioned.
Nope.
And they are good and true. And therefore, if the Pope beatified somebody who basically enslaved an entire people and beat them and did horrible, ugly things to them to shorten their lives from, their normal 30, 40, 80 years, whatever to 10, that must be the right thing to do. And therefore only Satan himself could possess somebody to do that. Not a sense of righteous indignation that they were converted to the point of or at the barrel of a gun.
No, and I have to wonder how much of the exorcism, like they said, it was a public event. Growing up Catholic, I know that Catholics they love to make a spectacle of things, and I'm not saying that's a bad. Like if you've never attended a Latin high mass, that's a spectacle, and that's gorgeous.
Absolutely.
But it's also a little excessive. So when they say they're going to perform a public exorcism, I have to imagine that it's more it's not just doing something. You have to show that you did something. Right. And so when you do this exorcism, it's basically like a reclamation. It's like, okay, you guys took down this statue. We're claiming it back. And since we're Catholics, it's going to be a ritual.
Right.
There is a lot of value in ritualistic activities for sure. I was in Spain while they carried the statue of someone. I can't remember if it was the Virgin Mary or if it was our Lord Savior Jesus Christ, but it went to these various key cities, and this was, I think it was Cordoba, I think is where I was at the time. It was one of the stops along the way, and everyone's in their finery, and it was actually quite interesting to watch how many people turned up for that, even in the 21st century. If I say this one last thing, this Sarah guy, he sounds like a real asshole, and we don't want to erase him from history because we want to remember the villains too and put them in their proper context. To contrast that, I remember a couple of years ago seeing a online comic talk about Bartolomé de las Casas. We don't have time to talk about Bartolomé de las Casas. However, he spent 50 years of his life actively fighting slavery and colonial abuse of indigenous people. He may have started the African Atlantic slave trade too. However, I think his heart was partially in the right place, and we need to see more of that kind of activity being platformed as opposed to just the heroes of the expansionist church of yesteryear. And by the way, I think he was like 150 years before Sarah. So with that said, I think it's time for viewer mail.
Viewer mail.
All right, Jim, do you have the viewer email available?
Yeah. The question is, could religious freedom laws be used against Christian activities? If gay workers can be fired because their Christian employer doesn't like their off-duty activities, can a Jewish employer fire workers for their objectionable off-duty activities, such as praying to Jesus, and claim it's his religious right to do so? That's the whole point behind a lot of what the Satanic Temple does. They use these pro-religious laws to point out how ridiculous they are. So if you put up a nativity scene, statue of Baphomet is going up right next to it. If you have an after-school Christian program, and this is the greatest acronym ever, it's the After-School Satan program that will be coming to a school near you. And I'm fairly sure that was intentional. But that is the kind of thing that they do. And yeah, the laws have to be written in such a way that they apply to the most people possible. And so, yeah, they can and they are. Johnny, you're the actual lawyer, so I should probably shut up and let you talk.
Allegedly. I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. Actually, I want to hear Puck about this because I hear myself all the time.
And I think this is where it's like, like Jim said, this is why you have that. It's like, if you're going to accept this, okay, you have to accept another religion also. And by putting a nice big public spotlight on it, you actually get to see how many things we do and accept just because they're Christian, and maybe you don't even think about it. Like in a place of work that I had a few years ago, they were talking about putting up a nativity scene until somebody pointed out, hey, wait a second, that's religious. and it doesn't even occur to them, like here in Ohio, it doesn't even occur to them that it's a religious thing. They just think about it as a holiday thing, and then it calls attention to it. It's like, wait a second, that this is a scene that's supposedly right out of the Bible, right? It's completely religious, but you don't think about that. And by shedding a light on this, on these religious things, it kind of lets you realize just how Christian influenced our society is today. But yeah. Anyway, sorry, Johnny.
Right.
The
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I don't have anything particularly, revolutionary to say about this. There's a certain element of there will automatically be religious aspects to our secular culture, right? Christmas isn't going anywhere anytime soon. There was a great Cracked article. I probably mentioned this last year sometime. Like, the origins of the Christmas celebration is not Christian. Not really. It's winter solstice. It's the end of the year. Christianity to make it more, to make the society more.
Yeah, and we appear to have lost Johnny here in the last little bit. But yeah, Christianity, yeah, and I don't see Christmas going anywhere. It's just a big secular holiday. There are other secular holidays that like maybe Easter that'll turn into something else, although that's kind of spring break anymore.
Even Halloween is based on All Saints, so I mean, there's so much influence. So
right, yeah. But those are okay because we can secularize those. But it's when governments promote a religion, either directly or indirectly, intentionally or not, that is problematic. And when we start basing what we as individuals or companies can do based on religion, that is problematic. And those laws are problematic, period. I think, end of conversation. We should not be basing what we can and can't do based on religion. It should be based on whether or not it's ethical and good. But so anyway, I think that Johnny leaving is a good point to end this.
It is, and we had a great show. I mean, we talked about the voter fraud the voter fraud for the upcoming election, and we talked about the Biden controversy or lack of controversy. Then we had a little bit of fun talking about the Catholic expansion into California and to the West. So I had a really great time. So thank you guys very much. And I guess since Johnny's not here, I'll take the closing responsibilities, if that's all right, Jim.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for watching us. If you have any thoughts on the new format, and if you have anything you'd like to talk about and to continue the conversation, you can email us directly right down there at radio@atheist-community.org. So, and we're also on Discord. Right, you can show up on Discord and leave a message there for us.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you want to support the show, you can also check out our Patreon, which I believe is at patreon.com/TheNonProphets. So thank you all very much for being here, Jim. Thank you. This was my first time doing an ACA show.
You did
I had
great.
a lot of fun.
Enjoyed having you on. We're looking forward to more.